Brian with City the Immaculata here. It's been a while, guys. I apologize for my absence. I have had, some of you may be aware, I've had some ongoing health issues, and sometimes I win, sometimes it wins. And when it wins, I have to kind of fall back on things like this, or scale back on things like this, rather. So I appreciate you guys if you pray for me in my continued recovery and health. It's always much appreciated and always benefited. So this one I had scheduled a while ago, and I know there were a few people that were excited about it, and I had to cancel it. So I'm sorry about that. I'm going through StreamYard, which is, that's a scale up for me in the technology. So we will see how well this works. We'll see how I manage, right? Because I've had, like I said, some rough days recently. If I have to end it, I'll end it, and I'll just pick it up again at another point. But I'm excited about this one. Again, I apologize for having to have canceled it on you or delayed it. But without further ado, we are going to be discussing today Laudato Si and a Catholic ecology, both theological implications, and I want to cover some practical applications for you guys. And I'm going to attempt with the practical applications to screen share. We'll see how that goes. I think last time I tried to screen share through StreamYard, I just lost my Wi-Fi altogether. So I'm going to do what I can with that. But in the meantime, I'm just going to, pray that the Holy Spirit holds up my Wi-Fi long enough to get through this lecture with you guys. So without further ado, I'm going to begin today with a quick reading from one of my favorite naturalist writers. It seems to be fitting to begin a talk about ecology by quoting from someone who had just an uncanny ability to write about the wild, nature on the East Coast landscape of the United States of America, like no one else really, in my honest opinion. I have mentioned John Burroughs before here. He wrote this particular series of essays in upstate New York in the 1870s. He was well known in his own day by the American public at the time, readership, who had, American public at this period of history had this great desire to experience nature, as even then there was this lament at the industrialization of the East Coast in particular, but the industrialization of the world at large. I fell in love with Burroughs' writing as a young man. I used to go on weekends when I was in high school. Some friends and we would go hiking up in the Great Blue Ridge and Shenandoah Mountains of Virginia. And in a world that even then, back when I was in high school, was just an incredibly fast-paced, and it's even more so today. I mean, I am a city boy through and through, but very blessed here in the great state of Virginia, specifically Central Virginia, that I live only an hour and some change away from these like beautiful mountain sceneries. For any of you that are familiar with the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Shenandoah Mountains, and I fell in love with nature then as a young man. And of all of the naturalists of this period, John Muir or even like a Teddy Roosevelt, none, in my honest opinion, had the pen of Burroughs. One of the things I love about this era, well, One of the things I dislike in general is how most, nature documentaries were always about these exotic places and plants and animals that I would never see. And but somebody like John Burroughs made the backyard of your own home something exotic and to admire and to love. And he wrote about, how the robin is an amazing forager, or how the squirrels storing food provisions in the late fall were like these soldiers on a mission. So let me just read to you from just a quick passage here, just to give you an idea. This is from his series of essays called Wake Robins. I would recommend it. I don't know how you guys feel about reading naturalist essays, but I just want to read this for you. He's writing here. This is from The Return of the Birds, and he's writing about the hawk. I believe he would have been speaking about the red-tailed hawk, but this is what he says. The hawk is the most notable. He likes the haze and the calm of these long, warm days. He is a bird of leisure, and he seems always at his ease. How beautiful and majestic are his movements! So self-poised and easy, such an entire absence of haste, such a magnificent amplitude of circles and spirals, such a haughty imperial grace, and occasionally such daring aerial evolutions. With a slow, leisurely movement, rarely vibrating his pinions, he mounts, and he mounts in an ascending spiral until he appears a mere speck against the summer sky. Then, if the mood seizes him with his wings half closed, like a bent bow, he will cleave the air almost perpendicularly, as if intent on dashing himself to pieces against the earth. But on nearing the ground, he will suddenly mounce again on a broad, expanding wing, as if rebounding upon the air, and he sails leisurely away. It is one of the most sublimest feats of the season, and one has to hold one's breath till he sees him rise again. I don't know if you guys, if you're fortunate enough to ever see the red-tailed hawks, but I have two. I believe it is a male and female in my neighborhood, and I've actually seen them hunt. And it's quite an astonishing thing to see a red-tailed hawk hunt. I have seen them catch birds in my backyard before. Picking up just at the end here, the calmness and dignity of this hawk when attacked by crows or the kingbird are well worthy of him. He seldom deigns to notice his noisy and furious antagonists, but deliberately wheels about in that aerial spiral and mounts until his pursuers grow dizzy and return to the earth again. It is quite original, this mode of getting rid of an unworthy opponent, rising to heights where the braggart is dazed and bewildered. The summer wanes and the autumn approaches. The songsters of the seed time are silent at the reaping of the harvest, this time of year, fall. Other minstrels take up the strain. It is the heyday of the insect life. The day is canopied with musical sound, and all the songs of the spring and summer appear to be floating, soft and refined. The birds in a new but less holiday suit turn their faces southward. The swallows flock and go. Silently and unobserved the thrushes go. Autumn arrives, bringing finches, warblers, sparrows. Silently the procession passes. Yonder hawk, sailing peacefully away till he is lost on the horizon, is a symbol of the closing of the season and the departing of the birds. I'm a very blessed man. My paternal grandfather was a man who was born to a Quaker family, Quaker father specifically. That man, my great grandfather, was like an astronaut to me when I was little and I heard these stories of him. I actually have he published his thesis. I have it on my bookshelf here, written for the University of Richmond in the 1940s, titled Making Science Laboratory Equipment at Minimal Cost. So well, he was the Great Depression generation. So they were all about reusing things. And he, after building a grade school, built the school shop and the science lab. But he was also a farmer, my great grandfather. He had been raised working the land. My grandfather himself was not a farmer. He moved from the country to the city for employment, but he was raised in that old world and had this great understanding of nature. And I'll never forget, it was kind of a breakthrough moment for me. I was a just a very young boy at the time, maybe 5 or 6, and he had this little plot of land in the suburbs he had built his house on, and in the backyard he had this wooded area. He was a great lover of nature, and he built these like little feeders for birds and squirrels and chipmunks. And he and my grandmother, they would wake up in the morning and drink their coffee, and they would watch the animals. That's what they did every day. They loved it. Now, for some reason, 5 or 6 years old, I had this idea that I wanted to start a garden. And he was great about like getting behind these little ideas that I had. Like, hey, Grandpa, um, I I want to do a vegetable garden. And he'd be like, okay, boy, well, let's go in the yard and find a spot. And this was actually a breakthrough moment for me. I remember and walking the yard with him, and he asked where I thought that we should plant. And I just, I picked some random spot, and he put a stick in the ground at that spot, and he said we would track the shadows throughout the day to see where the sun was. So that was kind of a breakthrough thing for me. And the other thing that he did is that when we actually found a spot, the first spot that I remember I picked didn't work out right, because he said if you watch the sun in the shadows, it doesn't get enough sunlight. So I said, okay, that's an aha moment. But the other thing that he did is that when we found a spot, he would put his hands into the dirt, and when he pulled up this handful of it, he showed it to me, and he said, "This is good dirt." And as he dropped it out of his hands, and I remember thinking like, "Oh, wow, there's such thing as good and bad dirt." And that really made me like relook at nature in a new way. Like there's a lot going on here that I wasn't aware of. And he was just full of that kind of knowledge. I mean, I look back now as an adult, as a grown man, and he's long gone, but I wish I had picked his brain more. I had learned so much from him. I really did, but it was not nowhere near the extent of the things that he actually knew. I remember one time he had me digging a ditch. I was probably a teenager at the time, and I was getting so frustrated. And what I was getting frustrated about, if you guys have ever dug a ditch before, or just a hole in the ground, as I was filling it back up, there was not enough dirt. And I was like, how does this even happen? Like, I dug this out of the ground. Now I'm trying to fill it back up. And I remember he comes along at some point. He could see I was frustrated. And he said that it was due to the fact that the moon was full, that we had a full moon. And I was like, okay, but it turns out that that was actually an old farmer's trick. That when the moon is full, you don't have enough. I forget which one it is, but I think it's when the moon is full, you don't have enough dirt to refill the holes that you dig. So this was actually a thing. And I'm convinced that we Gen Xers, millennials, Zoomers, we absolutely have lost and continue to lose so much ancestral knowledge that it's actually kind of astonishing and a little bit scary. Which brings me to today's subject that I want to discuss with you, which is Pope Francis's Laudato Si on the care for our common home. There's actually quite a bit in this, but it is really full of just some great insights, some practical insights, but also more to the point, it's theological insights. I want to finish up today. We're going to go through some of these theological insights, but I want to finish up today by helping you, oh Catholic brothers and sisters out there, helping you to get more in tune with nature in a way that helps us get involved in sustaining, as well as, I am convinced, reconnecting us back to our more primitive, dare I say, more authentic, more closely allied to creation selves. As you get involved in nature, you really do get away from the chaos, the shrill drivel of these concrete artificial jungles that we have created. And now we don't even just have like concrete jungles, we also have these like cyber jungles of like online world, which is a whole new thing that we're faced with. So I'm going to break this into two parts. The first part is going to be a little bit more straightforward. We're going to go through and look at just some of what I found to be some of the rich theological insights that can be gained from Laudato Si. And then I want to get you started. I'm going to attempt to see if I can do this to help get you guys started in how you can actually become a part of this thing that we call creation in a way that's less abstract and more formal and concrete. So we're going to move from the abstract to the applied. That's my goal anyways. So first off, for the encyclical itself, again, there's a real richness in this. To begin with, obviously, we are drawing Laudato Si from St. Francis's great hymn to the creation and the title, Praise Be to You. So right away, I want to point out that St. Francis's hymn is a great signpost of the faith. It's something of an apex or a vertex of our thoughts about why creation is the way that it is and not some other way. He notices, and I have seen his use of brother and sister and mother dismissed by some Catholics who would be embarrassed by this kind of language. In fact, I'm convinced that had it come from anyone else other than Brother Francis, you'd be seeing Catholics wanting to condemn this kind of language. I know if it were written today, you'd have Catholics on YouTube or social media calling it heretical and pagan nature worship. But since it comes to us from probably the most beloved Christian of all time, Brother Francis, you're hard pressed to dismiss it as a Catholic anyways. At best, I have seen some say, well, theology, that's the realm, we leave that to the Dominicans, or if we're really daring, we leave it to the Jesuits. But the Franciscans, their realm is to go and look at the birds. But that clearly misses the mindset that of what Francis and what the Franciscans since have been doing. Francis touched upon Brother Francis, St. Francis touched upon something that in a way revolutionized the faith. And I mean revolutionized in the truest sense of the word, that is to revolve, to pivot back on its axis, recirculating it back up to its origin. Now, Pope Francis notes right away that creation qua nature is not something that man possesses outside granted dominion that God has placed on us. But even that comes with a real responsibilities to till, that is to cultivate, to plow, to work. As well, God tasks us with keeping, to keep, that is to protect, to oversee, to preserve that which he has entrusted to us. Key word, entrusted, not given. All this is to say that man's dominion of the earth is highly, highly qualified. Not only do we not own creation, we have a responsibility, a divinely commanded obligation to see to it that the earth's ability to sustain is passed from generation to generation. And I do believe that man is a fundamental part of our of Earth's ability, or Earth's sustainability. Man's role in the tilling and in the keeping of Earth is directly correlated to Earth's ability to sustain and our ability to pass it on from generation to generation. I don't believe, as I feel like some in the, let's say, secular conservative movement believe, that man has no effect on nature on a macro scale. I don't believe that's true at all. Now, as far as ownership goes, Laudato Si quotes sacred scripture, which is quite plain in its language, that the earth and all that's in it belongs to the Lord. From Psalm 24 and Deuteronomy 10. We, that is man, are but sojourners. We are but passers-by in this cosmic drama the Lord has brought about. For, as Laudato Si notes in a beautifully subtle nod to the Franciscan thesis, that all came into existence for the sake of Christ. Quoting Colossians 1, that all things have been created through him, for from the beginning, mind you. One of the things I love about the Franciscan thesis, the absolute primacy of Christ, is that it almost consequentially, by the nature of its thesis, both places man at the center, specifically a man, the God man, but it also removes man, qua man, from the central place. We tend to think of all reality as this very anthropocentric thing. And in a sense, by way of the absolute primacy of Christ, this is true. But we as man hold primacy in creation. We do not hold primacy in creation. That actually belongs to the Son who took on flesh. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself with that. But this is actually a great sign, a great message of hope. We are not just tossed into a universe of random chance that is moving ever towards this greater entropic state of fluctuation, because all things are made through and for he who took on flesh. And we, as laborers in the vineyard, work to that end, to help sustain creation, to till the garden in which the divine dwells, and in which the divine actually lifts back up towards its origins. This beautiful tapestry, this web of interconnection built on relations between creator and created, just as we turn to each other, we of the church, militant to sustain each other, so too does nature turn to us to help sustain it. Again, it relies on man. Pope Francis is clear in this, that mankind, holding nature up, preserving it, caring for and tilling it, should never be at the expense of the unique dignity of man. And that's where some of the more secular movements are rightfully pointed out and condemned. Pope Francis is clear. He says, no, in fact, it's the ones who want to destroy and run roughshod over nature who are actually the most violent to man, who keep for themselves, who accumulate for greed, what could and should be used to lift up their brothers in Christ. There's a steady reminder throughout the sacred scripture of other and land. Laudato Si goes on to quote many such passages. The two, as I mentioned, and other and land are tied up, intended to be so in a harmonic communication, save that we marred the picture with sin. It doesn't happen by coincidence that the sin of man is followed by the cataclysmic fall of creation. That's not an accident. And that our God, the God of Genesis and the God of the Gospels, is a God who bound up into one act, creation and salvation. They are two, but one act. The two are but one and the same, by a God who freely chooses this universe, this nature, this path, all for the sake of Christ, for the sake of the incarnation. Granting us participation, the chance to work in and through this creative salvific process, is a great gift. But like all great gifts, it comes with a great responsibility. Chesterton once said that the universe, which seems so great and expansive, is but a jewel that we should, hold preciously in our hands and treasure and seek to save. And this is what we're getting at here in this cyclical. Pope Francis makes a key distinction between nature and creation. Nature is a system to be studied, understood, and controlled. It's what academics do. It's what industrialists do. It's what economists or environmentalists. It's what mankind focuses on primarily when we have these conversations. Creation, though, is understood as gift, illuminated by the emergence of personal beings, yes, a phenomenal fact that when one considers how self-sustaining nature qua nature seems to be as a system, yet here plopped right down into the middle of this seemingly self-sustaining system is man, rational, infused with the capacity of memory, intellect, and will right from the start, as if there was a light switch was turned on before we even began to ponder the nature on the basis of its relation to us. It was there kind of calling out to us from the moment that we began to abstract things from it. This is why St. Francis could go out into the wilderness, not to seek God. That's what was so revolutionary about St. Francis. We go to nature to find God. That's what we do. Francis went to God, and by sequence, by consequence, he found nature. When you or I go into the woods, we go to study the birds, but the birds came to study Francis, and he's calling us back to a time when the order of things were properly placed. And this is really, I think, the beauty of Laudato Si. It actually points to a very Franciscan theology where all of creation is ordered perfectly, and no amount of disharmony that we in our sinful state could ever completely undo that trajectory. This is why the notion of personal property as an absolute is an absurd notion. Personal property exists in so much as God gifts it. We in turn are to use it to turn it back towards God in and through how we participate with his creation and with land and with other. Notions of hoarding personal goods are straight from the evil one. Laudato Si says, especially post incarnation, post resurrection, autonomy is never impinged upon by Christ, for whom all of this exists in the first place, in the first. And we know from our Franciscan theology that all his work is to recapitulate all of this glory, all of the magnificence of this work that we are gifted to be included in on, back to the Father in the fullness of time. And it's just a wonderful, beautiful thing to reflect upon. And maybe, for those of you that are not as familiar with this, if you go back and listen, just like reflect upon that for some time. All of creation was ordered towards the incarnation. And we know, again, from our Franciscan theology, that this work of recapitulation, all of this glory, this magnificent work, we are included in as God's gift of creation to us to till and to keep, to be a part of this recapitulation of all things back to the Father. So I hope that just on a theological level, you can all appreciate what I'm saying here. Now, I want you all to be able to go out and appreciate the world. So much of modernity, look, it may be like obvious to you, but I if you follow this channel for a while, but I sympathize with quote unquote primitive cultures. It's a part of why I love Native American culture so much. There's something about being close to the earth that puts people in tune with the divine. If if you take a guitar string, for those musicians that are out there, right? You take a guitar string. Let's say you've got two guitars, right? They're perfectly in tune to one another. One on this side of the room, one on the other side of the room. If I pluck, say a B string, the B string on the other guitar will chime. It will harm because it resonates, right? So if I'm over here, I pluck a B string. This guitar over here that's perfectly in tune will resonate, and it will sound off. It literally starts playing itself. And I think that people who live close to the earth are in tune to creation in that kind of way. Not even nature so much, but creation as we're talking about here. I am a convert to the faith, and I've been thinking for some time about talking about my conversion story, though I struggle with the idea of it because it feels self-indulgent, but at the same time I love conversion stories, and mine I feel like is unique. But what fascinates me about Catholics seems to be different than what I feel like brought many others into the church. I get the sense that many Catholics or Protestants or Orthodox for this matter are more comfortable in today's society and even in ways more sympathetic around secular atheists than they would be around primitive pagans. And I tend to be the exact opposite, right? I am and always have been drawn to and fascinated by spiritual people. And to be honest with you, I would rather, if I were sent out on missionary work, I would much rather go and spend time with some, tribe in the Amazon, minus the mosquitoes and the humidity, than I would to go spend time with like Ivy League students in some Ivy League university who are delusionally convinced that we live in a natural vacuum that is like self-explanatory. I would much rather go with people that are much more in harmony and in tune with creation, albeit maybe through like an imperfect lens. They still, as St. Paul said, try to know and understand the Creator. But I feel like there's a real lacuna for many of you. Many of you couldn't walk me out of your front doors right now, take me to the closest natural site near your home, and explain to me anything of what's going on. And I think that's absolutely tragic. I bet most of you could probably tell me what Father Altman recently said or what Father James Martin just tweeted. You're probably keeping up with what's going on with the bishop in Texas. But could you take me to your local flora right now and tell me what's happening with it this time of year? And then you wonder why you're miserable. I'm by no means not one to brag here, but I do go out into nature as often as I can. And it's such a grounding experience to participate in it, to cherish it. I seek to truly know creation. I could take you into a forest here in my own state and tell you whether it's a new or an old forest. I can tell you what the dominant species are. I can tell you what the fauna you're likely to run into. And you should be able to do this. And I'm going to try to help you today with some tools and maybe some suggestions and some ideas. First, let me turn. John asked, "Do I have any opinion on Teilhard de Chardin?" I don't. I don't. I have my studies are more in the medieval and classical world. What I've heard of him, I'm intrigued by and I'm interested in, but I don't have enough knowledge to give you a strong opinion on. So I'm sorry about that. I don't. I tend to stick to the classical stuff more than I do the modern, and that's kind of what Ressourcement was about, right? To go back to those patristic and medieval sources, though you could spend your whole life just studying some of the Ressourcement guys. So it's a bit of a conundrum there. Sorry about that, though. Anyways, first and foremost, my suggestion to you, now we're moving more to the practical side, getting away from some of the theological points. First, foremost, just get outside. Go outside, touch grass, as they like to say, as the young folk like to say, except that grass, unless you live in the grasslands, grass is a man-made atrocity in most places. Go touch dirt or the foliage instead. That's my suggestion. And really begin to like the first thing that any good naturalist does is they watch and they listen. Look at what's around. Carry a notebook. Absolutely go out with a notebook. Look, I always take notes when I go into nature. My particular interest is in birds and trees. I like to chart out and identify trees. It's amazing to me what our ancestors have done, the knowledge that they have accumulated, we have accumulated through all of their hard work. I can go up to a tree, book in hand, and I can identify that tree within a relatively short time. It absolutely astonishes me, right? So, like, one of the things that I like to do just to kind of familiarize myself, to give you guys an idea what I'm talking about here. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see any of this, but like, I will go out. These are my own particular drawings here. I will go out and just pick up leaves and branches and seeds, and just try to identify, making notes where I can on what I can, right? And so you begin to really like kind of familiarize yourself with these things. I'd say first and foremost begin with that. And it looks like, yeah, it looks like my son. Oh, no, here they are. Begin with that. Very first thing, go out and observe. That's my kind of like fall in love with your local flora and fauna. I really recommend that you would get eventually, if you're going to go further with this. I really like these Patterson field guides. They have them. Mine, I use the Eastern Forest ones. Um, Make sure you buy the one that's relevant to the area that you're living in. What I like about these is that it's not just an itemized like list of species, which has its place, don't get me wrong. But what I actually like is that this is a more interactive thing. It shows you like, okay, I'm walking out into an old fields in the east coast of the US. This is what you're likely to find. This is what's happening in the soil. This is the kind of plant species that you're going to find in this area. These are indicator species to let you know what are the kind of dominant plants that are in an area. I really recommend, we all want to watch the animals, okay? Everybody likes watching. If you think about nature, that's usually the first thing that comes to mind. And don't get me wrong, animals are great, undoubtedly. But if you really want to play in the big leagues, get to know your local flora. At some point, all animals rely on plant matter. Even the apex predators are relying on it, right? Like so the kestrel hawk eats a warbler, but the warbler eats the caterpillar, and the caterpillar eats the leaves on the white oaks, right? So and if you watch native indigenous people when they track, when they hunt, they do most of their work based on what the forest is telling them. Come to know your local flora and you will learn more about your fauna. Trust me on that. Though I have to tell you, especially you young ones out there, nature works at a completely different pace than what you're used to. If all you've ever known is this right here, right? If you have like TikTok brain and you only think in terms of like seconds before you swipe in some general direction, throw all of that out the window. You're going to have to relearn reality when you go and step out into nature. One of the things I want to introduce you today is this thing called phenology. And if you really want to get good at it and come to connect with the kind of things that your ancestors had, with the kind of skills that they had, you're really going to have to learn a different pace in a different way, slower, what I actually believe is a much more divine pace. If you think about the great epochs of nature, it's a much, much more massive timeline than what you are used to, probably thinking in nanoseconds at this point. So, what I want to do without further ado is to attempt to share my screen. Let me see. It has not yet logged me out. So, this might be an abject failure on my part. I will try. This is the National Phenology Network, Nature's Notebook. This is what I use, and I would recommend that you guys use it as well. Let me just turn off my cam. How do I make this larger? Full screen layout? There we go. I recommend you guys turn to something like this, okay? What this does is you're looking at it, it takes you step by step, and you are looking at how to observe plants and animals in nature and the right way to do it. And it takes you through modules, training you. So, like you can see here, this is a 2-hour module. Plants and animal basically, phenology is just the study of cycles, cyclical things. So much of our ancestral knowledge was based in and the cycles of nature, right? So if you really want to be able to understand how nature works and move on its timeline, then studying phenophases is a wonderful way of doing that. So this is what I do, right? So I go out, take these modules that's free. All you do is sign up. They don't advertise with me or anything, so I'm not making any money by recommending this. You'll learn things like intensity measures. That's another 2-hour module. That's an important thing. So like right now where I'm in the fall and everything's changing for those of us that live in deciduous forests. So I really recommend that. The other thing is, let me see here. Move from the stage. Let me add another. Sorry, guys, you have to bear with me. You know how I am with technology. Let's see, stop screen. Okay, present, share screen. This one has expired, but let me log back in. So what you'll do once you sign up, you go through all of that, you will be able to join Nature's Notebook, and it's an observation deck. And my observation deck. So every week, what I do, I sign in, and then I've got a white oak, I've got some red-tailed hawks, and some blue jays that I'm monitoring. And I just go through and I walk out into nature and I take notes on what I'm observing. And you will be absolutely amazed at what you come to know and learn about nature by doing this. Again, if you are used to TikTok and you're used to Instagram and you're used to immediate gratification, nature's going to be a little bit of a different game for you. Let me start my cam again. So that's called Nature's Notebook. It's Phenology Network. The cool thing about that is that all of your data gets dumped in, that the observations that you make gets dumped into a pool of data that researchers can use, and it's actually quite helpful. And you can also, after you've been doing it for a span of time, I could show you guys, you're able to graph things out and see sort of the phases. Like for the white oak that I study, I can see the phases of when the leaves bud and come in and grow, of when they change colors and when they drop their leaves. Again, all at a very slow yearly pace. But again, this is what human beings have lived with for centuries, for our entire existence up until just a few generations ago, with the advent of cable television and home computers, and now with social media. I really just fear that so many of you are so disconnected. It's almost like our entire world is on life support. I can imagine a common day for many of you. You wake up, what do? You turn on water that's pumped from someone else, that's pumped from somewhere else. You turn on lights, that's electricity provided to you from somewhere else. What else do? You eat food that is provided to you, shipped from somewhere else, and then you're inside this four-wall dome. And then you leave and you go into your car, and that's another four-wall dome. And then you go to work and you enter another four-wall. So we're just completely disconnected from all of these things that Pope Francis is talking about here in this encyclical, this wonderful gift that we call creation. And I don't think there's any other way for you to come to terms with it other than to enter into it on its own terms. You're not going to make interesting Instagram shorts with watching and observing the changing of the tree leaves, right? That takes weeks, sometimes some trees months, and that's the time scale that nature works on. But it's such a rewarding thing to live. Look, I'm not judging you guys. I spent a good chunk of my life tied to the concrete jungle, but unplugging from it and finding and no matter where you live in the world, somewhere very close to you, unless you live in some major city and you have no way of getting out of it, nature is there close to you. And so many people are like, I see the question come up all the time about aliens and life somewhere else. And it's like, do you guys realize that you might be able to, with the alien question, you guys might travel for, massive amounts of time and space, and what I think is the futile attempt to reach some life form when you are literally surrounded by, I think, probably more life form than exists anywhere else in the universe within a few hundred feet of you, or a few thousand feet, or miles, or meters. It's an astonishing thing that, like, once you, I can go out into my own soil, going back to the beginning of this talk, when my grandfather, when I was just a little boy, and he put his hands in the dirt, he said, "This is good dirt." The reason that it's good dirt, he could look at that dirt and say that there was, well, I mean, of course, a real soil scientist would actually disagree that a soil scientist would say, no, you've got to have it taken to a laboratory and tested. But these types of people that are in touch with nature are able to stick their hands in the dirt, and without a soil scientist anywhere nearby, be able to tell you this is good dirt. Okay, the reason it is because it feels different. It has the kind of, I mean, he might not have been able to tell you whether they have enough nitrogen to grow tomato plants or something, but he knew good dirt when he put his hands on it. That's what I would like you guys to do. Don't worry about touching grass. Get away from touching grass unless you lived in the grasslands. Get out there and touch foliage and dirt. Get closer to this thing that we call creation, this gift, this thing that we don't owe, but we are actually a part of, in a participatory act of, when the redemption comes to the fullness of time. All of this, I don't want to see the world that we bring back to the Father, this utterly decimated and destroyed and chaotic thing. I would like to see some remnants of the beauty of creation to hand back to the Father as the final gift that the Son gives to him in the fullness of time. Anyways, guys, this has been my first time attempting StreamYard. Hopefully it's been clear, concise, without many interruptions, many breaks. I hope you enjoyed it. I will try to get back to doing these on a little bit more of a regular basis, see how things goes. Again, continue to pray for my recovery and health. God bless you all. Take care.